When Sandra shared her words, Keanu couldn't hide his feelings. The hall was silent, yet alive with an invisible energy. Lights glowed softly across the stage, where two figures stood, familiar yet vulnerable in this moment. Keanu Reeves, the man known for his calm humility and quiet strength, and Sandra Bullock, the woman whose laughter had carried warmth into millions of homes, stood side by side. The audience leaned forward, curious. They expected stories, jokes, or perhaps a memory of their films together. But no one was ready for what was about to unfold. From the first second, the air felt different. Sandra's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the microphone. Her eyes, usually bright with humor, carried a weight that could not be hidden. She looked at Keanu before speaking, and in that glance, something stirred in the room. There was a sense that the story she was about to share was not just about her, not just about him, but about every person who had ever hidden their truth behind a smile. "There were moments in my life," Sandra began, her voice steady yet fragile, "when I felt unseen. Moments where the world thought I was strong, but inside I was breaking. And during those times, I met someone who never once tried to fix me, but always made me feel safe just by being himself." A soft murmur passed through the hall. People exchanged glances, wondering where her words were leading. Keanu shifted slightly in his chair, his expression calm, but his eyes revealed a storm of emotion. He did not interrupt. He simply listened, the way he always had. Sandra's words carried the weight of memories. She spoke of long nights on set, when exhaustion made her question everything, and how a quiet presence beside her had reminded her that kindness was more powerful than ambition. She described days of laughter, but also nights of silence, where being understood without words was the greatest gift. "I remember once," she said, her eyes fixed on Keanu, "I was sitting alone, feeling like I had failed at everything. I thought no one noticed. But you sat next to me. You didn't say a thing. You didn't tell me it would be fine. You just sat there, with all your calm energy, and for the first time, I felt like I was enough. Do you understand what that means, Keanu?" The audience held its breath. Sandra's voice cracked, but she didn't stop. She let the emotion flow, raw and unpolished, like it had been waiting for years. Keanu's hands tightened on his lap. He tried to keep the stillness he was known for, but his eyes betrayed him. A shine of unshed tears reflected the stage light. His lips pressed together, as though holding back words that threatened to escape. The hall was no longer just a room full of strangers. It became a mirror for every listener who had once found comfort in the simple act of kindness. Sandra's story was not only about her and Keanu, it was about the unspoken power of respect, the quiet strength of presence, and the way true kindness never demanded recognition. As she continued, her voice gained strength. She told of times she doubted her own worth, and how Keanu's way of moving through life, never chasing applause, inspired her to rediscover her own resilience. "You taught me," she said softly, "that humility is not weakness, it is strength in its purest form. You reminded me that resilience is not loud, but steady. And you showed me that kindness does not need to be shouted. It changes everything in silence." By now, the audience was no longer simply listening. They were living her words. People wiped their eyes. Couples held hands tighter. Even those who came for entertainment felt they had stumbled into something far greater. Keanu's face was still calm, but it was clear he was fighting emotions he usually kept hidden. Sandra had placed him at the center of her truth, and the world was watching his every reaction. Then came the twist, the moment no one had expected.
Sandra paused, took a deep breath, and added, "And there is one thing I never told you, Keanu. Maybe because I was afraid. Maybe because I thought silence was safer. But tonight I cannot hide it anymore." The hall froze. The pause felt endless. Keanu lifted his head slightly, his eyes locking with hers. The weight of unspoken history hung between them. Her lips trembled, her hands gripped the microphone tighter, and she whispered, "You were not just my friend, not just my co-star. In those quiet moments, you became the anchor I never admitted I needed. You became the part of my story that I will carry forever." The room erupted, not in noise, but in emotion. It was as if a collective heartbeat had filled the silence. People leaned forward, unable to look away. Keanu's jaw tightened. For a man known to carry his emotions with discipline, this was different. His eyes glistened, his face softened, and his hand moved slightly toward hers, as though instinct pulled him to respond, but restraint held him back. And in that moment, everyone realized this was not a story of two stars on a stage. It was a story of every human who had once felt unseen and had found healing in the simple presence of another. The hook was set. The story had only just begun, but already hearts were tied to the journey. What would Keanu say? Would he reveal his own truth? Or would he remain silent, letting the weight of Sandra's words linger in the air? The suspense was alive, the emotions raw, and the journey promised to uncover something deeper than anyone had expected.
The hall still carried the echo of Sandra's last words. People were leaning forward in their seats, eyes wide, hearts unsettled. There was no music, no dramatic sound effect to carry the moment. Only silence, heavy and alive, the kind of silence that made every breath in the room feel louder than it should. Keanu Reeves sat still, but anyone watching closely could see the small tremors of his hands, the way his jaw tightened, the way his chest rose with a slower, deeper breath. For decades he had lived under the image of a man calm beyond storms, humble in the face of fame, quiet in a world that wanted him loud. But Sandra's words had pierced through that armor, reaching a place even he tried not to touch. Sandra lowered the microphone, and for a brief moment her eyes closed. It was not a performance. It was as if she had carried those words for years, holding them in the shadows of her heart, unsure if the world was ready, unsure if she was ready. But now, with thousands watching, she had finally set them free. The audience felt a pull in two directions. Some longed for Keanu to respond immediately, to break his silence, to speak from his heart. Others wanted him to remain still, because even his silence carried more weight than most people's speeches. But deep inside, everyone shared the same hunger. They wanted to know what his feelings truly were. Keanu's eyes lifted slowly, meeting Sandra's gaze. The world disappeared in that instant. The cameras were there, the stage lights glowed, the audience waited, but none of it mattered. In that look, there was history. There were late-night talks between takes, quiet rides home after long hours, the kind of small gestures that never make headlines but carve themselves into memory forever. Finally, Keanu leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "Sandra," he began, and already the hall grew tense, as though each syllable was a revelation. "You always believed you were unseen, but I need you to know something. From the first day I worked with you, I saw you. Not the star, not the woman the world expected you to be. I saw you, the person who cared for everyone else before herself, the person who carried pain but turned it into laughter so no one else would feel it. I saw you, and I never stopped." Gasps moved across the crowd, soft and genuine, like waves brushing a quiet shore.
Sandra's lips parted slightly, her hand trembling as she held the microphone against her chest. She had prepared herself for silence. She had prepared herself for a polite smile, maybe even a gentle nod. But she was not prepared for Keanu to strip away his calm mask and lay bare the truth in front of the world. Keanu's words carried no drama, no performance. They were spoken with the kind of honesty that could not be rehearsed. His voice was not loud, but it held the weight of years unspoken. He continued, each word falling with deliberate care. There were days I kept my distance, not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid my presence might change something you didn't want changed. I thought silence was my way of respecting you. But every moment you doubted yourself, I wanted to reach out and say, "You are enough, Sandra. More than enough." Sandra's eyes shimmered. Her hand rose to cover her mouth, as if holding back the tide of emotion threatening to spill. In the audience, people felt their own hearts crack open. It was no longer a story about Hollywood names. It was a mirror of their own lives. The friend they once had who saw them, the person who had given them strength when they could not find it themselves. And then came a twist, subtle but powerful. Keanu paused, his eyes shifting slightly toward the audience before returning to Sandra. "There's something else I never told you, something I carried in silence, thinking it was safer that way. But hearing your words tonight, maybe silence is no longer the kindest choice." The audience tensed again. It was as if the very air refused to move, waiting for his confession. Sandra's hand lowered, her eyes locked on him, searching for the truth behind his steady gaze. Keanu exhaled slowly, his voice deepening with the weight of his next words. "You thought you were alone in those moments of doubt, but you weren't. I was there too, fighting my own shadows, fighting the belief that if I opened up, I might lose the one friendship that mattered most to me. I hid behind humility, but the truth is, your presence saved me in ways I never said out loud." A tear slipped down Sandra's cheek, unchecked, raw. The audience could feel the tension between them thickening, not with discomfort, but with an intimacy so deep it left no room for distraction. Keanu leaned back slightly, his expression calm again, but his eyes betrayed him. They were filled with the storm he could no longer hide. Sandra swallowed, her voice breaking as she whispered into the microphone, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" The hall erupted in whispers. The question was not only hers, it belonged to every person watching. Why do we hide the truths that could heal us? Why do we protect others from our feelings when those feelings are the very proof of connection? Keanu's answer came slowly, almost painfully. "Because I thought silence was safer. But maybe silence was the greatest risk of all." The words fell heavy, yet freeing. They lingered in the hall, circling through every heart, reminding people that safety is not always found in hiding, and that sometimes the bravest act is to speak. The cameras caught every flicker of their expressions, but no camera could capture the depth of what was truly happening. This was not just a conversation. It was the collision of two souls who had carried each other in silence for years, finally breaking the walls that had kept them apart. The audience was breathless, already tied to this unfolding story. The suspense grew, because deep down they all knew this was not the end of their words. This was the beginning of a truth that had been waiting far too long. And as the stage lights glowed brighter, Sandra placed the microphone down, turned fully toward Keanu, and with trembling lips said, "Then tell me, Keanu, what have you been holding back all these years?" The silence that followed was louder than thunder, sharper than any storm. Every eye in the room was fixed on him. Every heartbeat waited for his reply. And with that question, the story tightened its hold. The hall was not just filled with suspense. It was filled with the promise of a revelation that could change everything.
The hall was no longer just a gathering of people. It had become something different, something alive. Hearts were moving in rhythm with the two figures on stage, as if the audience themselves were part of the story. Sandra's last question hung in the air like a fragile glass. What have you been holding back all these years? Keanu Reeves sat still, but inside, his silence was louder than any words. His eyes shifted down for a brief moment, as if searching the ground for strength, then back up to meet Sandra's gaze. The audience leaned forward, their bodies tense, waiting for his answer. They had come for entertainment, but what they found was truth so raw it unsettled them. His voice finally broke the silence. It was steady but low, carrying a kind of weight that came not from volume, but from honesty. Sandra, I held back because I believed my words could break what we had. I thought if I revealed my truth, I might lose the one thing I valued most: your trust, your friendship, the quiet bond that no one else could see. Sandra's breath caught. She was prepared for gentle words, perhaps even gratitude, but what he gave her was confession, laid bare in front of the world. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his voice deepening. There were nights after filming when I would sit alone, thinking about the moments you probably forgot, the way you laughed when you were tired, the way your eyes softened when you thought no one noticed. Those were the moments I carried with me. They were small to the world, but to me, they were everything. I never told you because I didn't want those memories to belong to anyone else but me. A murmur passed through the audience. Some wiped tears without realizing it. Others held their breath, afraid to disturb the rawness of the moment. Sandra pressed a hand against her chest. Her heart was racing, not from shock alone, but from recognition. She had felt something in those small moments too, but she had buried it, convinced it was only her imagination. And now, hearing Keanu's words, those buried memories rose like fire inside her. Her lips trembled as she spoke. All this time, I thought I was the only one who felt it. I thought I was foolish for reading too much into silence. Keanu shook his head gently. Silence is an emptiness, Sandra. Sometimes silence holds more than words could ever say. My silence was full. It carried respect. It carried care. It carried feelings I didn't trust myself to reveal. But tonight, maybe it's time I stop hiding. The audience erupted inside, though no sound left their lips. They could feel the shift happening on stage. The walls between them were breaking down piece by piece. Keanu's face grew more vulnerable, his calm demeanor cracking just enough for the world to glimpse the man beneath. You once told me I made you feel like you were enough. But what I never told you was this: you made me believe I could be more. When I was lost, when I carried grief that I thought would crush me, it was your laughter, your light, your stubborn refusal to give up that reminded me I could still stand. You saved me without even knowing it. Tears ran freely down Sandra's face now. She did not try to hide them. Her hand reached out, trembling, as if pulled by something beyond control. It hovered between them, waiting. The audience sat frozen. No one moved, no one coughed, no one dared to break the sacred energy of that instant. Sandra whispered into the microphone, her voice breaking. All this time, I thought I was the only one who felt it. I thought I was foolish for reading too much into silence. Keanu shook his head gently. Silence is an emptiness, Sandra. Sometimes silence holds more than words could ever say. My silence was full. It carried respect. It carried care. It carried feelings I didn't trust myself to reveal. But tonight, maybe it's time I stop hiding. The room filled with a deep ache, the kind that comes when truth finally rises after being buried for too long. It was not just their story anymore. It was every untold story of friendship, love, respect, and restraint that had ever existed in human hearts. And then came the moment no one expected. Sandra stepped closer, closing the distance between them, her voice trembling but firm. If the storm is inside us, then let's stop pretending it isn't there. Let's face it together. A collective gasp filled the hall. The camera zoomed closer, capturing every detail, the tear tracks on Sandra's cheeks, the shine in Keanu's eyes, the way their bodies leaned toward each other without realizing it. Keanu inhaled slowly, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. His hand moved slightly, then stopped, caught between instinct and hesitation. The entire hall could feel it, the pull of something bigger than either of them, something that could no longer be ignored. And in that breathless moment, the story deepened. It was no longer just about words shared or feelings hidden. It was about courage. The courage to face what they had both buried in silence for years. But what would Keanu do next? Would he step into the storm Sandra had invited him into? Or would he retreat into the silence that had defined him for so long? The suspense hung thick, the emotional grip unshakable. Every person in the audience knew whatever happened next would not just reveal his truth, it would define their story forever.
The air inside the hall felt heavy, yet fragile, as if one wrong sound could shatter the moment into pieces. Sandra's words, "Let's face it together," still echoed in every corner. People in the audience barely moved, afraid that even shifting in their seats might break the spell. Every eye was locked on Keanu, waiting, hoping, desperate to see what he would do. Keanu Reeves, known for his stillness, for his ability to hide storms behind calm waters, sat frozen for a moment that stretched endlessly. His hand hovered between them, caught in the gravity of Sandra's presence. His lips parted, closed again, and parted once more. It was as though he was fighting a battle with himself, one that had been raging silently for decades. Inside him, memories stirred, memories he had long locked away. Nights on set when exhaustion pressed against his chest and Sandra's laughter had pulled him back from the edge. Quiet car rides where neither of them spoke, but he felt safer in her silence than in anyone else's words. Moments when he caught her struggling with her own doubts, and he wanted to reach out, to tell her she was not alone, but stopped himself, believing that silence was the safer path. But tonight, her words had stripped away his defenses. Tonight, there was no shield left between them. Keanu finally leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "You're right, Sandra. We've both been carrying this storm. I thought silence was strength, but maybe it was fear. And fear? It kept me from giving you the truth." Sandra's breath hitched, her tears glistening under the stage lights. She did not speak. She let him continue, because the weight of his words was something she had waited to hear, even if she had never admitted it aloud. "I lost so much in my life," Keanu went on, his voice thick with emotion. "People I loved, people who were my world. After every loss, I told myself I couldn't risk feeling that kind of pain again. So I built walls. I let the world think I was calm, humble, untouchable. But those walls kept me from something real. They kept me from telling you what I felt every time I looked at you. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some clutched their hands together, as if praying he would go on. Others bit their lips, fighting back their own emotions. Sandra's hand trembled as she reached for his. Her voice was soft, almost breaking. "And what was that, Keanu? What did you feel?" The hall grew impossibly quiet. Every camera lens zoomed in. Every heart in the room raced. Keanu's eyes locked with hers, no longer hiding, no longer retreating. "He felt peace," he said slowly. "I felt seen. I felt like the pain of my past didn't own me anymore when you were near. I felt home." Sandra's lips parted in shock. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from recognition, from the overwhelming flood of hearing the words she had once dreamed of but never expected. The audience erupted, not in cheers or applause, but in sobs, in quiet gasps, in hands covering mouths to hold back emotion. Strangers held each other's hands, couples leaned into each other, and friends exchanged glances that carried unspoken meaning. It was not just about two people on the stage. It was about every heart that had once longed to hear the truth from someone they cared for. Sandra whispered, her voice trembling but filled with certainty. "Then don't hide it, Keanu. Not anymore." The hall was alive with emotion, suspense thicker than ever. The world had just witnessed walls crumbling, truths revealed, and feelings too deep to remain buried. But even now, questions hung in the air like thunderclouds. What would happen next? What did these words mean for the bond they had guarded so carefully? The storm had broken open, but the journey was far from over.
The hall was no longer just a stage and an audience. It had become a living heartbeat. The truth had been spoken, and yet it felt as though the real story was only beginning. Keanu's words still echoed in the air. "I can't carry it in silence anymore." People in the crowd had tears in their eyes because what they had just witnessed was not scripted, not polished, not performed. It was real. Sandra's hand was still in his, her grip gentle but firm, as though she feared he might slip back into silence if she let go. Her tears streamed freely, but there was a glow in her face that made her look both broken and whole at the same time. She took a shaky breath, her lips parting as if to speak, but for a moment nothing came out. She just looked at him, the man who had carried her through shadows without ever asking for thanks. Finally, her voice found strength, though it trembled. "All these years, I thought it was just me. I thought I was foolish for feeling something more, something I didn't know how to name. I told myself it was better to laugh, to pretend, to let silence protect us. But deep down, Keanu, I felt it too. I felt it every time your calm made me steady, every time your kindness reminded me I was worth something." The audience stirred, soft gasps and quiet sobs echoing around the room. Sandra's confession was not just hers. It belonged to anyone who had ever buried their truth out of fear, anyone who had ever hidden their heart to protect something fragile. Keanu's eyes softened. The storm inside him was no longer something he could hide. His voice was heavy with emotion but steady. "I always thought you deserved someone stronger, someone who could give you everything without fear. I told myself I wasn't that man. But the truth is, Sandra, you made me want to be that man. And every time I stayed silent, it wasn't because I didn't feel it, it was because I felt it too much." The words hit her like a wave. She covered her mouth, unable to stop the sob that escaped. Her body trembled, but she didn't let go of his hand. Instead, she held it tighter, as if anchoring herself to the truth she had always wanted to hear. The audience leaned in further. Strangers held each other's hands. Some pressed tissues to their eyes. The story unfolding before them was not just about two people on stage. It was about every hidden feeling, every silent love,
every unspoken truth in their own lives. And then came another twist, one that no one expected. Sandra lifted her free hand, wiped her tears, and for the first time that night, her voice grew stronger, braver. Keanu, if silence was fear, then let tonight be courage. Tell me now, tell me without holding back, what do I mean to you? The room froze. Her question cut through the air like a blade, sharp and unavoidable. Everyone in the hall knew this was the moment, the one that would either break them or bind them forever. Keanu's chest rose with a deep breath. He looked at her, really looked at her, as if searching her face for every memory they had shared, every unspoken word, every smile that had carried him through. His lips parted, his throat tightening, but he forced himself to continue. I mean... He paused, his throat tightening, but he forced himself to continue. I mean more than I ever let myself believe. You are the light I carried when everything else felt dark. You are the laughter that reminded me life could still be beautiful. You are the one person who saw me, truly saw me when the world only saw an image. You are... home. The hall erupted, not with noise, but with raw emotion. People sobbed openly. Some covered their faces. Others shook their heads in disbelief at the honesty they were hearing. Sandra's tears streamed harder, but she smiled through them, a smile that carried both pain and joy. Her hand shook as she whispered back, "And you, Keanu, you are the calm I prayed for when my heart was restless. You are the strength I borrowed when I thought I had none. You are the kindness that healed parts of me I never spoke about. You are everything I never thought I deserved." The audience could no longer hold back. Applause broke out, not loud and wild, but soft, steady, almost reverent. It was not clapping for entertainment, it was clapping for truth, for courage, for two souls who had finally torn down the walls that had kept them apart. Keanu squeezed her hand, his eyes glistening. We spent years protecting silence. Maybe now it's time we protect the truth instead. Sandra nodded, her lips trembling, her voice breaking into a whisper. Yes, the truth. But even as their confessions filled the hall, suspense still lingered. What did this mean for them, for the bond they had guarded so carefully all these years? Would the world accept their truth, or would it turn against them? The story had reached its most vulnerable point, but the journey was not yet complete. Because truth, once spoken, does not just bring freedom, it brings consequences. And those consequences were still waiting.
The applause softened, fading into a quiet hum, until once again the hall fell into silence. But it was not an empty silence. It was thick with emotion, charged with the weight of everything that had just been spoken. Keanu's words still echoed in the air. Maybe now it's time we protect the truth instead. And Sandra's reply, yes, the truth, was still trembling on her lips. The audience sat as though they were witnesses to something sacred. They were no longer just viewers of two stars sharing a stage. They had become part of a moment where hearts were stripped bare, where truth stood taller than fear. Strangers held their breath. Some even held each other, united by the raw humanity they had just seen. Sandra's eyes, wet with tears, never left Keanu's. She searched his face as though she was seeing him for the first time, as though decades of friendship had built toward this very instant. She wanted to believe his words fully, without doubt, but her heart carried scars, and scars often whispered lies of fear. Her voice, trembling but brave, broke the silence. Keanu, we've said the words we never dared to say, but now I need to ask, what happens when this moment ends, when the lights go out, when the cameras are gone, when we are just us again? The question landed heavy. The audience stirred slightly, for they all knew the truth of it. Confessions spoken in the heat of emotion often falter in the cold quiet of reality. Sandra's reply was not just hers. It was the question of anyone who had ever taken the leap of honesty and feared the fall that came after. Keanu's lips pressed together as he leaned back in his chair. For a long moment, he did not answer. Instead, he looked down at their hands, still intertwined, her fingers fragile yet fierce against his. His thumb brushed softly across her skin, a small gesture, but one that carried more than any word could. Finally, he raised his gaze. His eyes were no longer calm. They were vulnerable, open, carrying the reflection of everything he had lost in life and everything he still feared losing. Sandra, what happens after this moment depends on us. The world will talk. They will create stories, twist them, make them louder than the truth. But what matters is not what they say. It's whether we stand by what we feel. The audience stilled again, as though the ground itself had paused to listen. He continued, his voice deeper now, filled with the weight of his own struggle. I know fear. I know what it's like to lose people you love, to watch them vanish and feel powerless to stop it. That fear made me silent with you. It convinced me that if I never said the truth, I could never lose it. But the truth is, silence cost me more than words ever could. Sandra's eyes filled again, but this time her tears were not only of sadness, they were of recognition. She knew the pain he carried. She had seen glimpses of it in the quiet of his eyes, in the way he carried grief without burdening anyone else. And now hearing him put it into words, she felt closer to him than she ever had before. She leaned forward, her voice soft but steady. I know your pain, Keanu. I've carried my own. I've lost too. I've doubted myself so many times. I thought silence was safety, just like you. But maybe safety is not what we need. Maybe what we need is courage. Their eyes locked, and in that connection, something shifted. The hall, the cameras, the lights, they all faded away. For that moment, it was just two souls speaking truths they had hidden for too long. But the story did not stop there. As their hands remained joined, the audience began to murmur again. People were whispering, leaning to one another, emotions spilling out in ripples across the room. And then a voice rose above the whispers, trembling with raw sincerity. Don't stop now, a woman from the crowd called out, her voice breaking. The world needs to hear this. We need to hear this. The room erupted in agreement. Voices carried, soft but insistent. Tell us more. Show us more. Don't let silence win again. Sandra turned, her eyes wide at the sound of strangers urging them forward, her hand pressed against her chest, overwhelmed by the realization that their story was no longer theirs alone. It had become everyone's story. She looked back at Keanu, her voice a whisper only he could hear, though the microphone caught every word. They're right. It's not just about us anymore. It's about everyone who has ever hidden, everyone who has ever stayed silent when they should have spoken. Keanu nodded slowly, his face softening. Then let's give them what silence never could. Let's give them truth. He turned back to the audience, his voice stronger now, no longer carrying the restraint of fear. Every one of you has felt it. The silence between you and someone you care for, the words you were too afraid to say, the fear of losing them if you spoke. I know that fear. I lived in it. But tonight, I choose something different. I choose honesty, and I hope you do too. The hall trembled with emotion. People began to cry openly, not out of sadness, but out of release.
His words reached deeper than the stage. It reached into the hidden places of their hearts, places they had buried for years. And Sandra's voice joined his, soft yet unshakable. Don't wait as long as we did. Don't let fear tell you that silence is safer. Say the words, speak the truth, because silence might protect you from rejection, but it will also keep you from love, from healing, from everything real. The audience rose to their feet not in a burst of applause, but in a wave of reverence. They were not cheering stars on a stage. They were standing for the courage of two people who had turned silence into truth, fear into honesty. And yet, even in the roar of emotion, suspense still lingered. Their truths had been spoken, their walls had crumbled. But what would happen when they stepped off that stage? Would their bond endure the storm of the world, or would the weight of their revelations tear them apart? The story was nearing its climax, and the hall was holding its breath for the final turn.
The standing ovation did not feel like an applause for actors on a stage. It felt like an ovation for truth, for courage, for the kind of honesty that most people never dare to reach. Sandra and Keanu stood there, still holding each other's hands, overwhelmed by the weight of what they had shared. Tears glistened in their eyes, but there was also something else now. Light, relief, freedom. Sandra turned toward the audience, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. She looked at the sea of faces, strangers who suddenly felt like family because they had all become part of this moment. Her voice trembled, but she let it flow. We are not perfect people. We are not stronger than anyone else. We are just human. We carried fear, we carried silence, and we let it hold us back. But if tonight means anything, let it mean this. You do not have to wait years to speak the truth. You do not have to bury your heart in silence. People cried openly, nodding, whispering to each other. Some hugged, some pressed their hands to their faces, some simply stood frozen with tears running down their cheeks. Her words had cracked something open, not just in her own heart, but in everyone who listened. Keanu squeezed her hand gently and stepped forward, his voice calm but firm, filled with the quiet strength that had always defined him. I've spent most of my life letting the world see only a part of me. I thought it was easier to hide, to let silence speak for me. But the truth is, silence is heavy. It grows heavier with every day you let it sit in your heart. Tonight, standing here with Sandra, I finally understand something. Silence doesn't protect love. It starves it. The audience erupted into gasps and sobs again. His words were not polished, not rehearsed. They were raw, and that rawness made them more powerful than anything else. Sandra turned to him then, her tears falling freely, her smile trembling but radiant. So what do we do now, Keanu? What do we do with the truth we've finally spoken? The question hung in the air, pulling the audience to the very edge of their seats. It was the question everyone wanted answered. Keanu looked at her, his eyes carrying the depth of years of loss, of hidden feelings now unchained. He stepped closer, their hands still bound together, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed through the hall because of the silence. We live it, Sandra. No more silence, no more fear. We protect this truth, whatever it costs. Her lips parted in shock, then curved into a smile that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. She nodded slowly, her whole body trembling as she whispered back, "Then let's protect it. Together." The audience erupted, not in chaos, but in a sound so unified it felt like a single heartbeat. Cheers mixed with sobs, applause thundered, and voices shouted words of encouragement, as though they were sending blessings into the air. But even in the noise, Sandra and Keanu did not break their gaze. They were in their own world, a world that had been hidden for years, now finally set free in front of thousands. Sandra leaned closer, her voice low but steady. You once said I was home for you. Well, Keanu, you are home for me too. You always have been. His face softened, the tears finally breaking free, and for the first time that night, he did not try to hold them back. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Then let's never lose it again." The audience saw it, felt it, and knew it. This was not a performance. This was not scripted. This was life. Raw and unfiltered, played out before them with all its pain and beauty. And as the lights dimmed slightly, the moment stretched into something timeless. Sandra rested her head against Keanu's shoulder, her hand still in his, and the hall, for once, was not filled with noise, but with reverence. When the applause finally settled, when the cheers softened into silence again, Keanu lifted his head and looked back at the audience one last time. If you remember anything from tonight, let it be this: kindness matters. Honesty matters. And the people who make you feel seen, the people who make you feel like home, don't let them wonder how you feel. Tell them, while you still have the chance. The audience rose again, this time with a roar that shook the hall. Strangers embraced, couples held each other closer, friends looked into each other's eyes as if silently promising not to let silence steal their truths. On stage, Sandra and Keanu stood together, no longer defined by silence, no longer chained by fear. Their story had begun with hidden words, but it ended with a truth so powerful it touched every heart in the room. And so the story closed, not with a final bow, not with a line rehearsed, but with a promise spoken in the tears, the smiles, and the shared heartbeat of a hall that would never forget the night when Sandra shared her words and Keanu could no longer hide his feelings.